Welcome back. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, we're basically putting on our financial detective hats to investigate CMA Part 1, Section C, Performance Management. Because, if you've ever found yourself wondering how on earth companies figure out what went right, what went horribly wrong, and maybe most importantly, who is actually on the hook for those outcomes, well, you're exactly in the right place for this explainer.
So, right off the bat, here's the central mystery we are trying to solve today. How did we actually do compared to what we planned to do? I mean, in business, you build a budget, right? And that serves as your grand, overarching plan. But let's be real, reality rarely matches the plan perfectly. Things happen. Performance management is all about digging into those actual results, spotting the differences, and really understanding exactly why those differences popped up so management can step in and fix things. Here's our roadmap for this investigation. We'll start by looking at the plan versus reality. Then we'll get into materials and labor variances. After that, we'll tackle overhead and sales tracking, discuss responsibility and transfer pricing, and finally wrap the whole thing up with measuring total performance. Let's get into it. Starting with Section 1, the plan versus reality. This is all about establishing our baseline.
So as financial detectives, we really rely on two main tools. The first is variance analysis. Now, a variance is literally just the difference between what actually happened, our actual costs or revenues, and our budgeted amounts. If we spent way more than planned, yikes, that's an unfavorable variance. Spent less, that's favorable. But look, we absolutely cannot investigate every single misplaced penny. It's just not practical. That's where our second tool comes in, management by exception. This basically means we're only putting our magnifying glass on the major anomalies. We just don't have the time to sweat the tiny everyday fluctuations, right?
Actually, think of it kind of like a school principal. A principal isn't going to sit there and check every single student's daily homework. That would be insane. Instead, she only intervenes when, say, a student's grades drop dramatically out of nowhere, or if there's a major behavior issue. By zeroing in on those exceptions, managers save a ton of time and put their energy exactly where the business actually needs it.
All right, moving to Section 2, materials and labor variances. Let's see how these cost clues actually break down. Let's translate some of these famously dense accounting formulas into plain English, shall we? When we're looking at direct materials or direct labor, the total variance is really just the sum of two very specific clues. Clue number 1 is the price variance, or if we're talking labor, the rate variance. This simply asks, did we pay the right amount per unit or per hour? Clue number 2 is the quantity or efficiency variance, which asks, did we use the right amount of materials or hours to get the job done? By pulling price and quantity apart, it's like, boom, we instantly know what went wrong. Like, did the purchasing department overpay for the supplies, or did the folks on the factory floor just waste a bunch of them?
Now, here's a fun twist. When a product uses multiple inputs, that quantity variance gets sliced even further into mix and yield. Let's use a dog food analogy, because why not? Imagine we're manufacturing dog food using beef and spinach. The mix variance is what happens if you completely mess with the recipe, like swapping out some of the pricey beef for cheaper spinach. Sure, you save some cash, but the nutritional quality changes. The yield variance, though, measures if you just used way more total pounds of ingredients than the recipe called for, totally regardless of what the beef to spinach ratio was. So in short, mix is the recipe ratio, and yield is the total volume dumped into the machine.
Okay, Section 3, overhead and sales tracking. Time to peel the onion a bit further on indirect costs and revenues.
When we start evaluating our sales, we literally have to isolate two completely different things: the price we charged and the actual number of units we pushed out the door. The flexible budget variance compares our actual results to a flexible budget, which handily isolates the effect of the selling price and the cost per unit. On the flip side, the sales volume variance compares that flexible budget back to our original static budget. This purely tracks the effect of selling more or fewer units. If you don't keep these two things separate, man, you might look at the numbers, see revenue is up, and throw your sales team a parade, completely missing the fact that they only hit those numbers by massively slashing prices.
Which brings us to Section 4, responsibility and transfer pricing. Now that we found the variance, who exactly do we talk to about it?
To hold someone accountable, you have to know exactly what they actually control. There are basically 4 types of responsibility centers in a company. A cost center manager, they only control costs, so we evaluate them purely on efficiency, those variances we just talked about. A revenue center focuses strictly on hitting sales targets. A profit center manager controls both, so total profitability is their game.
And finally, an investment center manager controls revenues, costs, and the actual assets invested. So for them, we use metrics like return on investment. The absolute golden rule here is simple. You can only evaluate a manager on costs they can actually control. Anything else is just unfair.
So, to evaluate these managers accurately, companies use a multi-level contribution income statement. We start off by subtracting variable manufacturing costs and then variable non-manufacturing costs. But pay super close attention to steps 3 and 4 here. Step 3 is the controllable margin. This deducts controllable fixed costs. We use this specific level to evaluate the manager's personal performance. But step 4, the segment margin, deducts traceable fixed costs that the manager has zero control over. Why? Because this level evaluates whether the business segment itself is actually worth keeping around. You grade the person at level 3 and the whole segment at level 4.
Now, things get a little spicy when these internal divisions start selling to each other. This is where we bring in the transfer price. It's exactly what it sounds like, the internal price charged when one division sells to another inside the exact same company. Getting this transfer pricing system right is absolutely crucial. You want to promote goal congruence, basically making sure the managers are acting in the whole company's best interest, but you also want to protect their divisional autonomy so they can still run their own operations independently.
To make this work, there's a brilliantly simple, acceptable range for setting that transfer price. It literally has to fall between a floor and a ceiling. The absolute minimum the selling division should even consider accepting is their variable cost plus any opportunity cost. Like the lost profit if they had to turn away an outside customer to make this internal sale. On the flip side, the absolute maximum the buying division should pay is the external market price. Because why pay more internally than you'd pay a random vendor, right? Any negotiated price that lands inside this sweet spot is a total win-win for both divisions and ultimately the whole company.
All right, final stretch. Section 5, measuring total performance. Did the business actually meet its ultimate goals?
For those big investment centers we talked about, we usually look at 2 heavyweight metrics, return on investment and residual income. Now, ROI is incredibly popular. It's a simple percentage, which makes comparing vastly different sized divisions super easy. But it has a fatal flaw. Imagine a manager with a stellar 20% ROI. They might actually reject a fantastic new project that earns, say, 18%, simply because it would mathematically drag their personal average down. That is terrible for the company's overall growth. Residual income, or RI, completely solves this, because RI is an absolute dollar amount calculated after subtracting the company's required rate of return. Any project that clears that hurdle just adds more cash to the total RI pool. It totally fixes that behavioral quirk of ROI.
But look, relying exclusively on financial numbers is kind of like driving your car while only staring into the rearview mirror. You're going to crash eventually. That's why the best companies use the balanced scorecard. It looks at the business from 4 distinct perspectives. The financial perspective is great. It shows how we look to shareholders. But the other 3, those are your leading indicators of future success. The customer perspective asks, how do our buyers actually see us? Internal process zeroes in on what we absolutely must excel at operationally, and learning and growth focuses on developing our people. Think about it. A huge cut to employee training today might not show up on the financial statements for a full year, but the scorecard is going to start flashing red immediately.
Which really brings us to a final, somewhat provocative question. Are you measuring what actually matters, or are you just measuring what's easy to count? Tracking 100 random metrics isn't going to magically make you successful. Being a true financial detective means combining variance analysis, clear responsibility accounting, and a truly balanced scorecard to uncover the real human story behind the numbers. Well, I hope this explainer gave you some fantastic tools to do exactly that. Keep investigating, stay curious, and use these frameworks to drive some seriously impactful performance.